Welcome to today's presentation on Purposeful Patching with Chef Automate. Let's get started. Nick, why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit more about yourself and what we will be covering here today?
Thanks, Jade. Indeed. So as we get the ball rolling here, thanks everyone for joining us. The sort of core of the conversation today is we're going to take a look at how Chef Automate can help ensure that our patches are continuously audited and applied to our systems. And I'll be running the show today. As Jade said, my name is Nick Rykar. I'm a technical product marketing manager here at Chef, which sort of makes me half practitioner, half marketer. I end up building a lot of demo environments, workshops, and trainings, and writing a lot of blog posts. There we go, to help let folks know how they can use Chef to improve their automation story. Now, before we can dive in and talk about how Chef Automate is going to help us audit and apply our patches, it's worth taking some time to really take a look at what the goal of applying software patches is. And this is a step that I find is far too often skipped when we are starting a new evaluation, which is really getting to the high-level crux of what it is we're solving for. When it comes to applying software patches, the first time I really asked myself this question, it seemed that the answer was fairly self-evident. I'm applying software patches to ensure that I have the most up-to-date versions of software installed on my systems. Pretty easy and straightforward, but as I thought about it, I realized also wrong. I feel pretty confident saying this is wrong because while this may be ultimately what we do, if it was really our end goal, this would be a very short conversation. If you want to get the most up-to-date versions of software installed on your systems, well, that part's easy. We have commands. This one is an example on Ubuntu or other Debian-based systems. And other operating systems have similar versions of the same type of command. But most systems already have a concept of how to go out and install all the updates that they need. But we don't do this. And the question becomes, why aren't we doing this? And this is why it's important to take a look at these goals. Because with a solution that seems on its surface that simple, what's stopping us from just running it and calling it a day, saying our systems are patched and moving on to the next thing? And that comes down to, once again, evaluating the specific outcome we're actually working towards. To help us answer this question, I have here a quote from Aslak Hellesøy, who's one of the creators of Cucumber. And Aslak suggests that we pop the why stack. And he defines popping the why stack as asking the question why over and over again for a max of 5 times until we end up hitting up one of the following business values: managing our cost, increasing our revenue, or protecting our revenue. Or if we're not profit, then that might be driving our mission and protecting our mission, but variations on that same concept. And if we're about to implement a feature that doesn't support one of those values, chances are we're about to implement a non-valuable feature. So let's use this as a prism to evaluate patching from and see what we come up with. Does software patching manage our cost? Well, very explicitly, no. In fact, it increases our cost because we need to spend time, resources, and money, most likely, into implementing and maintaining some sort of patch management system. Does patching increase our revenue? Well, we might have to update certain packages to add a new feature to our software, but generally speaking, patching isn't going to directly increase our revenue unless our business is defining those types of solutions for our customers. That connection is going to be probably indirect at best. Does patching protect our revenue? Well, to this one I want to say yes, not just because it's the last bullet on the list here, but if I have my systems running the latest packages, then I'm less at risk for vulnerabilities, 0 days, exploits, which in turn means I'm less likely to have to incur the cost of recovering for the types of intrusions, hacks, etc. that those problems can bring to bear. To help further crystallize this, Chef has spent a lot of time talking about defining the outcomes that we want to get out of automation. And at Chef, it's our position that high-performing software organizations are able to outperform their peers on each of three key outcomes. The first, speed, or the rate of software change. How quickly are we able to get new features and solutions to our customers, particularly as the industry is demanding faster and faster iteration? Efficiency, defined as the effectiveness of that software change. How easily can I apply that change across systems? How easily can I validate? How easily are those changes introduced by anyone in my organization that needs to have the power to introduce them? And risk. What is the quality of my software change? Am I creating any unforeseen problems? And will I be able to catch those problems before they start impacting my users and customers? And keen folks might notice that risk came up on that previous slide as well. When we talked about protecting revenue, we talked about mitigating the risk that having vulnerabilities present in our system might expose us to. And indeed, of these outcomes, risk is probably the most directly related to that revenue protection. But as we'll see here, it's going to be important to be able to evaluate and mitigate those risks quickly and efficiently. None of these outcomes exist in a vacuum, and they will continue to be how we frame the changes that we make. But at the very least, this gives us a better working definition of our goal. The goal of applying software patches is to protect revenue by reducing the risk to our systems. Of course, I still haven't answered that first question. Well, Nick, if updating your packages is going to reduce the risk to your systems, and you've got a simple command that will already update all the packages, then why not just do that? And the answer to that is, well, the thing about risk is that risk comes in many forms. When we're talking about patching, the most obvious one is, what is the risk of not upgrading? Am I able to determine where patches need to be applied and what versions are available, and how broad across my environment those issues exist? But of course, the thing that keeps us from running those commands is that second question. What is the risk of upgrading? Now, if we apply those updates and we don't put thought into how those updates are being applied, we can effectively increase rather than reduce our risk if we're not careful. And of course, if the cure is worse than the disease, as the saying goes, no one is going to buy our medicine. Consider, has a system update ever broken a legacy application? Or heck, do you run legacy applications on long since EOL'd operating systems? Because that combination of libraries and services are known to work with it. On a broader level, how many folks have prevented their desktop systems from updating? Because last time they did it, the printers stopped working. These are the types of risks that stop us from applying upgrades and make us scared of approaching patch management systems. And it's important to be able to evaluate those risks as we update. And then, of course, even after we get both of those questions, the question remains, do I have a way to determine whether that upgrade was successfully and consistently applied to all the systems that needed it? Thankfully, Chef has answers for all of these questions, as we'll be seeing here. But my favorite part is the patching part's still easy. So this is really the key here. The trick isn't necessarily to find something less scary to run than, say, an apt-get dist upgrade. It's to figure out why a command that already does what we need it to do is scary to us and figure out how to make it less scary. And that's where Chef Automate comes in. So Chef Automate provides us with a platform that gives us insight into everything that's happening in our environments, but also provides answers to all of those questions we were asking when we talked about why we don't just apply patches directly. The risk of not upgrading can be answered in compliance, where we can use a set of inspect profiles to evaluate our systems based on a set of requirements, say that our systems are running the most up-to-date packages, and see where in our environments those requirements are not met. Workflow provides us with a way to evaluate the risk of upgrading. Workflow is a continuous delivery solution that allows me to evaluate any change through a series of stages that can both require sign-off from stakeholders and allow me to see how my changes will behave in less sensitive environments before ultimately promoting those changes to my production environments. Finally, visibility is a way that I can determine whether or not I upgraded successfully. Chef keeps track of all changes that are made across the nodes it manages and gives us a way to evaluate the specific nature of those changes and whether or not they did what we needed them to do. And once all said and done, we can come right back into compliance after we've applied those changes to see whether or not we are still at risk for whatever we found in starting this journey. I've been calling this in Chef detect and correct. Once we know the things that we need to change, have a means to change them, and a way to evaluate that they've been successfully changed, we've laid the groundwork for introducing continuous automation to our environment. But while I think my deck is very pretty, nothing is quite as fun as watching a demonstration. So I am going to get a screen share started momentarily, and we're going to take a look at how we can evaluate this kind of patching scenario with a bit of a practical demonstration. So, with any luck, folks should be able to see my screen now. I don't have the chat in view anymore, Jade, so if there's any issues, feel free to cut me on off and chime in. But for the time being, we're going to be taking a look at an environment that I'm using to manage my Planet Express application. I saw some familiar names on the call, so folks that have interacted with me in my past life as a sales engineer have probably seen Planet Express before. But if you haven't, it's a fictitious company that I'm taking ownership of for this demonstration, whose business is selling framed prints of NASA satellite imagery. And as we called out earlier, while I do want to make sure that my systems are up to date, what's of paramount importance to my company is when my customers come in, they click add to cart and check out, they need to be able to buy my product. Otherwise, my business isn't functioning. So we'll be taking a look not only at ensuring that our systems get patched, but in making sure that in so doing, we haven't adversely affected those systems that are mission critical to our business. So with that in mind, let's dive into Automate. So the first thing we'll take a look at here is this Nodes tab, where we can see some of that visibility data that I called out in the slide deck. Here we can get an overview of all of the machines that are being managed. If there are any failures in my system, they'll show up here. So far, everything looks clean. And we can also take a look through any of our nodes to see what specifically Chef is doing whenever it runs. In this view, we can see historical data about my Chef runs. And for each, we can see resource by resource, each individual change that Chef applied, which of those changes successfully did something, and which of those changes were already in their desired state, and as such didn't need to take any action. In this same view, we can find a ton of information about our systems. And one thing that's worth noting, if we take a look at this audit here, we can see that I'm already running some compliance profiles. And we'll dig into these as we go forward. But for right now, we're running 3. 2 are specific to my Planet Express site. I want to make sure that I'm running safe SSL protocols, and I've got a simple smoke test being run here to make sure my site is up. And finally, we see the Linux patch baseline. This is actually a profile that is included with Chef Automate and available in the Chef supermarket that lets us take a look at our patch level to see whether or not we're actually running all of the latest software we need. If we take a look at the run list here, this is where we're defining what Chef is going to change when it evaluates my systems. So here I have a few what are called cookbooks in Chef parlance. One called BJC e-commerce, which lays out this lovely site for me. A base profile that does all of the baseline configurations, makes sure the Chef client is running and that audits are happening. And it looks like I'm already doing some patching here. So this may be a real boring demo if I've already got my systems patched and up to date. But keep in mind, while this is letting me know Chef successfully did all of the things I asked it to do, what this doesn't tell me is a validation of whether or not I asked Chef to do the right things. And that's where compliance comes in. And we see a little bit different color scheme here, and that is because my machines are all failing their compliance scans. So I have some problems here. If we take a look, I've got my profile store. This is where we can see the contents of those 3 profiles called out earlier. Smoke test being a pretty straightforward one, where I'm taking a look at curling the website and making sure that its content matches what I expect. In this case, that the text Planet Express appears somewhere on that site. When it comes to the nature of our failures, though, we can hop into this node view to see what specifically is failing on these servers. In the scan results, I can see, well, I have 2 past profiles. So, thankfully, my smoke test is passing. You can see the site is not on fire. And SSL is passing. All of the protocols I expect to be enabled are enabled, and the ones I expect to be disabled are disabled. But I do have a failure in that Linux patch baseline. So there's 2 sets of controls here. The first one is fairly simple. It's checking to see whether Linux is up to date and just returns true or false. If it returns true, awesome, we're done. We don't need to do anything else. However, since we got false, we also have the second set of controls, which is going to give me each and every package that is behind whatever is available to me in my source of truth. In this demo environment, we're keeping that fairly simple. My source of truth is just the public Ubuntu package repositories. But even there, on some freshly logged systems, we've got plenty that is out of date and needs to be updated. So where do I go from here? By all rights, it looks like my nodes should be getting patched, or at the very least have a patching cookbook in their run list. So what we'll have to do is take a look at that cookbook and see if there's anything obvious that's preventing it from working as desired. So for that, I've already got a workstation set up here. If you're new to Chef, we have a number of tutorials and trainings available on our site that I'll call out at the end here to talk about how we set up these workstations and what tools are required in order to communicate with Chef. But the most important one is one called knife.rb, which is where I'm defining the Chef server that I'm talking to, PEM keys that I'm using to authenticate, and in this case, since I'm working in AWS, I can tell it where to find my AWS secrets and what region I want to deploy new things into. But we're not going to dive too deep under the hood today. What we're going to do, though, is take a look at my cookbooks, and in particular, the patching demo cookbook. See what we can't see. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in my text editor of choice. This time it's going to be Sublime Text. And Chef recipes generally consist, or rather Chef cookbooks, generally consist of, if nothing else, recipes that define which tasks are going to be performed when Chef checks in. We have 2 recipes here. Update, which is pretty much just running that apt-get dist upgrade we saw, this time with all of the extra flags that say, yes, I really mean everything. But the default recipe is what's actually getting run by my systems here. There's the apt update resource, which is just making sure that I have the most up-to-date cache from my apt repository. But we'll notice here that while I am putting in some code to include that upgrade recipe, it's currently commented out. That's no fun. So we're going to have to see about changing that. In order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and hop back up into actually hop one further up into my demo main directory here. And we're actually going to go ahead and check my project out of version control, which I have available to me from this workflow tab. This is where I have the ability to submit changes to my cookbooks through that aforementioned pipeline to ensure that I get it evaluated in my pre-prod environments before ultimately delivering that change all the way to production. If updating patches is going to impact or break my site in some way, I want to find out about that early so that I can address. But before I can do anything, I'm going to need a copy of that patching demo code from my version control, so I have the ability to commit a change. Here we see my patching demo project, and inside workflow, there's this handy clone project tab where I can simply copy paste a command that will clone my project into my local directory here. I go into patching demo now. I can see that I am sitting on the master branch as I expect. Excellent. I won't belabor too much the commands for version control here. It is certainly actually type and then talk. There we go. It's like walking and chewing bubblegum. At any rate, we do recommend that our users do practice some form of version control to ensure that we have a good history of the changes that we're making. Here I've created a new branch, Rycar update patches, so that I can start evaluating a change. And as before, open things up in Sublime. Actually, looks like the most recent version of it even has a little comment telling us to uncomment this before going live. How about that? So my change should hopefully be just as easy as updating this file. Chef also allows me to version the cookbooks that I'm creating. And so since I'm making an update to the code, so too will I update the version of this cookbook. With those two updates made, and I can run a git status here to confirm, I can commit that change and start evaluating it in the workflow pipeline. So if we do a git add, or rather just a git commit -am to take my change, let's start updating packages. And at this point, I run delivery review. Delivery is a command line utility that's part of our development kit that can be used to submit a new change to this pipeline. Again, I won't dive in too deep into the specifics of each stage of this pipeline, but ultimately what needs to be done before a new change can be taken live is first it needs to run through some preliminary verifications. It's running things like code linters and syntax checkers to ensure that my change is at least syntactically valid and doesn't contain any obvious issues that I want to remediate before submitting it for peer review. When this stage is completed, my colleagues have the ability to take a look at the change that I've proposed, see the nature of what that change entailed, and determine whether or not that change is ready for further evaluation. In this case, to keep things snappy, I'm going to go ahead and break the rule of 4 eyes and approve my own change here so that we can start seeing how the change gets applied. And one thing that's important here is that right now I have a very simple environment. There's really only one application that I care about, and evaluating that should be fairly easy. However, that's probably not going to be the case for most organizations. Even if you have one main application, it might depend on different microservices or utility boxes, or in many cases, you might have many different applications on different platforms that all need to be evaluated whenever a change like this is made. What's powerful about this workflow process is that it's going to let me do 2 important things. The first one is very simple and connected to what we just did. Evaluate whether or not updating packages via this cookbook I've created actually solves the problem that compliance called out for me. But just as important, if not more important, is determining whether or not those are going to introduce any new, hitherto unforeseen problems to the other systems that are going to need to function after applying these updates. When we get to this acceptance stage that we're currently in, we're going to do the first half of that equation. Apply some patches to a pre-prod node, make sure that that package update looks good, and ultimately, if things are looking good, we'll be pressing this deliver button to start shipping it the rest of the way down our pipeline. So far, fairly standard. Where things get interesting is when we hit union. This is where we're going to evaluate not only whether or not our project works in a closer to production environment, but whether or not any of the downstream dependents of that project have any issues. More on that in a second, but it looks like acceptance is done with us. So we can take a look first at our nodes. Let's see if the cookbook did what I expected it to do. We'll see here. Acceptance looks to have run successfully. Or rather, it looks like I did not update my deploy targets here. Tisk tisk, Mr. Nick. It's all right though. Doing things live and moving things forward, we'll just kind of combine things together and continue the previous chain of thought. Beware of custom demo environments, etc., etc. But effectively, what we're doing here is checking to see, and indeed looked here and could have seen in my testing that it's not actually kicking off deploys anywhere. That's all right. As we go forward here, we'll actually see via the dependencies feature I was alluding to earlier, how we're still going to get this project applied where it needs to downstream. I mentioned that in Union, we're going to be applying things not just to my patching pipeline, but to another pipeline, BJC e-commerce, that depends on it. You can actually see here, if I hop into my BJC e-commerce project, which again is the project responsible for deploying this site, I can see that it calls out a dependency on patching demo, whereas patching demo in turn calls out that it is required by the downstream project, BJC e-commerce. What this means effectively is that whenever I push a change to patching demo, any project that requires it, i.e. BJC e-commerce, will also evaluate whether its deployments and tests work when we hit that union stage. So what we'll see here as things get updated is that provision runs in my patching environment. We'll run a deploy that applies those patches. So that's the one that'll probably take a minute or two to complete. And then it's going to run through that same set of stages for BJC e-commerce to ensure that the change I proposed doesn't have an adverse effect on the systems that depend on it. And as we are doing this, I'm going to take a quick hop into another channel here, see if everything is looking good. Excellent. I see we've got a few questions coming in. There are a couple in there about running database patches, and I see there that it just shoved Windows at you. Apologies for that. Hopefully we should be back to my workflow pipeline here. But indeed, there is not going to be a database patching portion to this, although interestingly enough, part of my site deployment is doing a database dump import. But a lot of the similar types of questions and concerns would apply here, which is to say when we're applying database updates, particularly to systems that might have modifications coming in internally, we need to validate that whatever updates we're applying are non-destructive things, your migrations and the like. And this is the same sort of system where we can use Chef cookbooks to stage and evaluate whether or not those database patches have any adverse effects, and via similar types of dependency chains, if there are multiple stakeholders for a particular database operation, we can evaluate them all together. And indeed, what we see here is that after provision ran for patching demo, it also ran for BJC e-commerce. And it's only after both of these complete successfully that we have a successful run. Ultimately, that means if we trigger a problem downstream, even if there is no issue in my project in and of itself, we will still see a failure get triggered here, and it will stop our code from going live until we remediate, so that we find these things out early and before systems go into production. Looks like Union completed successfully, so let's hop back in here with slightly less egg on my face than in acceptance and see what all happened on this run. So we have a couple of new resources here from patching demo. I can see that the app update happened, but also that update all the things execute block we looked at is being applied. So the moment of truth here is, did I solve compliance? Hey, I have a pass node. So this is where I can go in and check my work and see that Union is now passing Linux patch baseline. we see here that it skipped looking at patches because this time around, the operating system was up to date. Most importantly, we see that in so doing, we haven't broken any of our other things. Our SSL checks are still coming back clean. Our smoke test is still coming back clean. And of course, the proof is in the pudding. When I go to Planet Express, everything is still working. I can still go in, make my orders, and to my end user, the updates we just applied were completely opaque, and things just work as they always have done. Now that that's been evaluated and passed, you'll see that it's going to go through that same process, running through my rehearsal and delivered environments. And indeed, those each have associated nodes checking in, so those will be getting those updates as those stages complete. And with any of these, I can go ahead and do the same manual validations if I need to at any point. In this case, I'll go ahead and grab the public IP, since I don't have a VPN into this, and make sure that if I hit up my site, everything comes up as expected. And indeed, this is expected because I'm using self-signed certificates, hence my little browser warning. Now, as far as where to go from here, the source code for this little patching demo is available on GitHub, and we'll make sure that the link is included with the webinar as it gets, the recording gets archived. And you'll see here that same sort of default recipe with the commented out upgrade, as well as the upgrade.rb. And in here, we'll actually see as well that we can use Test Kitchen, which is another tool in the development kit to validate things. In this case, you'll actually see that we can specify inspect tests as part of a Test Kitchen configuration, so that in this case, when we run a kitchen verify, it will run through the same validations coming directly from GitHub, rather than, as I'm doing here, pulling them from my Automate server. We can see that also if we go into the Chef supermarket and go into tools here, we have the ability to take a look at compliance profiles and all of the ones that are publicly available, as well as licensed users of Chef Automate have access to a number of extra profiles based on the Center for Internet Security's baselines. So if we actually go into the profile store here and look at available, I can take a look at all of the different platforms that are available to me. And if, say, I wanted to go start evaluating, let's see, what version of Linux are these systems running? These systems are running, let me go ahead and say, here we go. Let's search for a version. I can never remember where these things live in here. What you're actually seeing here is in the UI, we can go ahead and query all of the information that Chef knows about a system. Here you can actually see there is a ton of data that gets pulled by the system profiler here in order to tell us what we have running in place here. So it looks like we've got Ubuntu 14.04 running on these systems. I can go ahead and grab, say, the Ubuntu 14.04 CIS benchmark profile, and we can further iterate on what problems we are identifying and solving in our systems. In this case, we would just go ahead and grab the latest version of this benchmark, which will install locally on my Automate server, and I can then simply grab this little link here, Lila CIS Ubuntu, and add that to my run list for these machines to start having them apply that profile. Let's see how the pipeline is doing. If we hop back into workflow, it looks like the change has been applied everywhere except for acceptance. But indeed, the rest of my environments, I see the same results. All three have passed, and for each individual one, I can take a look at those specific results and confirm that all of my profiles are being evaluated. Similarly, with each one, we can confirm that there were no new issues introduced into my Chef client runs, and even confirm that updating all of my things is exactly what happened when that system was run through its Chef client run. Alrighty. So I am dropping the screen share now. You should be back into the slide deck momentarily. But I'm going to go ahead and take a look through the questions here. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to throw them into the Q&A panel, and we'll go ahead and start digging into them.
Awesome, Nick. Jade here, everybody. Thank you for submitting all of your great questions. We're going to get started here with one question for Nick being, how are environments kept separate for testing?
Thanks, Jade. So environments get kept separately in a few different ways. The way that I'm actually using in my system here is via proper noun chef environments. So Chef has a concept of environments where each node that we're managing belongs to one and only one environment. And in each environment, we have the ability to set separate attributes, which can control the specific data that's being consumed, as well as what I was using in my demonstration here, cookbook version constraints, where I can define in each environment which versions of our cookbooks are allowed to be consumed. So as I push a new version like I did today, that's how we are keeping them evaluated only in my earlier environments until those deploys happen later. In the workflow pipeline, that's actually being done as part of the provision stage.
Great, awesome. So we have another question from James. James wants to know, how is the Linux patch baseline and the patch this thing cookbook get updated when new CVEs are published? Holding for Nick here.
These things happen when you forget to press go live. So why have I jumped back to the Nyan slide? Not just because that adorable little toaster pastry cat tickles the cockles of my heart, but because we talked a bit about how on the individual node basis, having a simple update everything command is probably what we want. Now, when it comes to being very granular about how we manage our patches, that's where our source of truth becomes important. Because this command may do different things on different systems. All it does is say, go to my repository and grab whatever that repository has. So when we have new CVEs, new zero-day vulnerabilities, or heck, just new procedural versions of the different packages that we depend on, how we are consuming those becomes of key import. Generally speaking, the types of tools that folks have traditionally used for that sort of thing would still apply in this model, where if you were, say, either maintaining your own mirrors of other repositories or using solutions like Red Hat Satellite or WSUS, have the ability to set up per environment, per application, whatever the appropriate line of demarcation is, repositories for those systems. And it's into those systems that we would be updating patches and then having the associated nodes in that environment just pull the now newly available changes. When it comes to auto-populating those things, again, it either comes down to grabbing them from publicly distributed repositories that handle those CVE updates, either public repos or different private repository solutions. But ultimately, on the node side of things, we don't need to start maintaining individual lists of those CVEs. What we can do, however, is augment our compliance story by effectively evaluating for any specific vulnerabilities specifically if those are particularly important to us. For example, in my demo environment, that patching will take care and say, make sure OpenSSL gets updated if there's new versions available. It doesn't tell me whether I'm vulnerable to something like Poodle. And that's why we have that SSL checker profile as well, because it's not just important to ensure that I am not using a vulnerability prone version of software, but also that my configurations are not set in such a way as that vulnerability is an issue. Whew.
Solid answer, Nick. Lots of information there. Speaking of patching, we had a question asking if we'd be covering Windows patching with Chef.
Yeah. As you may have noticed, all of the nodes in my example were Ubuntu. When it comes to Windows patching, I think that the same overall structure applies. In this case, rather than connecting to an apt repo, generally speaking, what I've seen to be common best practice for folks is using a tool like WSUS to distribute packages. In Chef, there is a publicly available WSUS server and client cookbook on our supermarket to help configure those things. And as I was mentioning with I think I used Red Hat Satellite as an example, the same kind of thing would apply here, where we would likely want to have a specific source for any environments that we want to segregate from each other, and then can apply those updates environment by environment. Now, in the Windows world, there might be a couple of extra considerations there. For example, oftentimes applying core system updates will require system reboots. And those are things that we can, in our cookbooks, either handle automatically. There's reboot resources in Chef and the like, or use things like our stopping points to apply the packages and then schedule the reboot to apply.
Great. And then is there a home user version of Chef Automate for a smaller number of systems to patch?
Yes. So there's actually a number of different ways to consume Chef Automate. The most recent one, and actually this will be called out in the subsequent Learn Chef materials we hand out, is what we've called the Automate Pilot. It's essentially a stripped down version of Chef Automate that can be used to very quickly get started getting hands-on with the tool. It runs in a simple Docker container that can be run on a local system, and is a great way to dip your toe in the water of using Chef Automate. For sort of managing small numbers of systems that still need to have kind of a production-worthy Automate server running, probably the easiest way to get started is with some of the cloud solutions that we have. Both AWS and Microsoft Azure have marketplace images of the Chef Automate server. And in AWS, there's also a service called OpsWorks for Chef Automate that allows you to spin up an Amazon-managed Automate server where it will do the node licensing directly as part of your Amazon billing. And I believe it is also eligible for their sort of aggregated free tier services, where I believe it is the first 5 or 10 nodes that do not incur licensing costs during that free tier promotion. But other than that, you're paying sort of that same kind of hourly rate for license that you'd be paying for instances in the cloud there. Outside of that, of course.
Great, awesome. So, sorry, I think I just cut Nick off a little bit, but we have lots of questions, so I guess we're just going to move right along. Nick, can Chef send out alerts when new patches are available?
Indeed. So no worries there, Jade. I think the only thing I had at the end there was that the Automate server can also be manually installed on any system that meets its prerequisites, and those are all available in our documents and downloads. And we do offer trial licenses for trying that out on your own infrastructure. As far as automatic notifications, there we go. So the short answer is yes, we do have the means to do so. However, this is not to imply that it is specifically going to be looking for CVEs, vulnerabilities, etc. So what we would still be responsible for is defining what things we care about in compliance as those profiles. And certainly Chef will be making profiles available as we create them, and also provide tools for folks to create or consume subsets of profiles. But ultimately, when it comes to notifications, we have the ability within the Chef client to send out notifications via what are called handlers, so that we can send emails, texts, what have you, whenever certain criteria are met over the course of a Chef client run. The Automate server has an API. So anything that has sort of RESTful API querying abilities would be able to determine whether machines have fallen out of compliance. And there is a forthcoming notifications feature that will allow us to enable direct notifications for certain types of scenarios. Right now, that is already present in workflow, where we can, when changes have been submitted or are ready for approval or delivery, or have failed, all of those events can send out notifications to things like Slack or other services that have webhook functionality.
Great. And we have another question from the audience. They're wondering, how can we do custom filtered compliance and patching on specific servers? I'm not sure if we've already touched on this a little.
Now it's my turn to take it away too soon. Sorry about that, Jade. So yes, and actually one of the key features when InSpec 1.0 was released, and InSpec is the open source language that drives compliance, is the ability to essentially wrap profiles and define subsets of controls that you'd want to use. So for example, if you wanted to take the full CIS benchmarks for your platform, but there's maybe a few of the individual controls in there that are not of particular concern to your organization, you do have the ability to selectively include within that profile what you'd wish to use. When it comes to just distinct sets of profiles, that's even easier to accomplish, where each node, environment, role, or policy file in Chef can define different sets of profiles based on whatever your requirements are for a particular environment. The way that I've done this here, and I think this actually ties into another question, where someone asked if they can use the audit cookbook. That's actually what I was using in this scenario. So when it comes to running those compliance scans, there are a few ways to do it. As mentioned, our testing suite allows it to be used as a verifier. There's a command line utility that's a part of our development kit that can be used to trigger scans over SSH or WinRM. Or what I used in my example was a publicly available cookbook called the Audit Cookbook, which you can use to have a node run a compliance scan as part of its Chef client run. And then to the previous question, in the Audit Cookbook, we can define which profiles specifically need to run and where to grab them from and send the data to. So if you've got an Automate server, we have the ability to pull those profiles directly out of the Automate's profile store and send the results to that compliance view that we saw in there. But it can also be used for the open source Chef offerings, where profiles can be grabbed from local file system, the web, or Git, and saved to a local JSON file, which would just give us a summary of that scan rather than sending the visual representation that can be gleaned from Automate.
Awesome. And then we only have time for maybe another question or two, but this one is coming from Josh. How does Chef know that a package is actually vulnerable? Not whether a newer version is available, but whether specific versions of packages are actually vulnerable. Sorry, guys. Waiting for Nick here.
There we go. For folks that were around for the university webinar, looks like I may have hit that same audio bug there. At any rate, should be back online now. And the question was, how do we know that there's actually a vulnerability present rather than simply that there are new versions of packages available? And that is a key question. So, as with any automation, right, it's important to understand the nature of what we're automating. And what I just showed you simply queries my repository and make sure that things are up to date. When it comes to specific vulnerabilities, it's a matter of understanding the nature of those vulnerabilities and either creating or consuming profiles that can speak to the challenges presented therein. And the nice thing is that there's great examples of this already in the wild. I ran across the other day just a sort of community profile for detecting a Red Hat CVE. We have some blog posts that talk about specific vulnerability detection, things like WannaCry, or heck, even going back to things like shell shock. And in each case, it's a matter of determining how the vulnerability is identified and creating an inspect profile to validate that. And as the CVEs are published, so too are sort of steps for determining whether your machine is subject to that vulnerability. And that would be what we would be turning into an inspect profile. And inspect provides a fair amount of resources that will handle probably about 95% of the types of things that you would need to validate, whether it's a simple version check or inspecting open ports, the return commands of arbitrary shell code, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Okay, and there's one more question, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. But Nick, what happens if we find a package that will cause a production impacting issue?
Indeed. And so that's where having an effective way to stage these things becomes important, because ultimately those sorts of things are going to happen. What is important is that if we have a way to evaluate them pre-prod, we can do further analysis. And there's not necessarily a magic bullet in this case, right? When we find an issue, there is some calculus that you need to do, which is how much effort would it take to remediate this issue, and what is the nature of leaving a particular package in its current state. The benefit here is that we can approach that as planned work rather than sort of in the throes of responding to that type of issue surfacing in a live environment, where if the vulnerability is not particularly mission critical, or if it's just a matter of applying some updates separate from vulnerabilities, then we might be able to plan sprints around determining and remediating. Or, if it turns out to be low-hanging fruit, we can just sort of take care of and remediate via the same process, where either it comes down to evaluating our software and figuring out wherein a compatibility issue lies, or figuring out a way to pull a particular patch from a set to be applied. And that's another case where having your own managed repositories comes in handy, so that we can more easily control what is and isn't in place. The key differentiator there is that in each of these cases, we are making a decision rather than responding to things that have caught us unaware. And one of the metrics that has been really kind of eye-opening to me as we started entering into this compliance space is that a vast majority of the vulnerabilities that hit organizations are vulnerabilities that have been in the wild for months, if not years. So being able to address those things as part of day-to-day workflow rather than in response to a crisis is going to, I think, severely change how we're able to adjust to the ever-changing nature of our industry.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Nick. We are almost out of time here, so I just want to close it up with a couple reminders. One, if you were experiencing some difficulties, don't worry about it, because a copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are going to be available in the resource list widget at the bottom of your screen, so you can follow along and see what you missed. We also encourage you to download the slide deck and bookmark any links that you might find useful. And we want to also thank our audience for all the live participation today. We got a ton of questions, and if we didn't have time to answer yours, we'll definitely follow up with you via email and address those in the next week or so on the Chef blog. We, of course, hope you found value in the information that was presented. If you like what you saw, we encourage you to share the recorded presentation with your teammates or professional networks. The on-demand version should be available by tomorrow, and we'll email you as soon as it's ready. Thank you guys again for your time. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your week.